Today's shop project is we're going to make some carbon fiber foot peg inserts. These are cosmetic part that's been on my bucket list for a long time. Today I got to make them. I wound up using some scrap material, and of course I got all the painting done, and they're sitting out in the garage drying right now. And the way the day played out, and I had no idea how it was going to be, it absolutely turned out to be a beautiful day. They were predicting rain. It turned out sunny. It warmed up in the afternoon. And the good news is I got all the painting done in one shot. Now, one of the little detailed parts I wanted to make for the MT09, I wanted to make a little piece of material, probably carbon fiber, to go in here, painted blue so it would accent the other covers that I've made. And it looks like it's going to be a relatively straightforward, simple project, but I wanted to get started today. And I want to explain, as I've done the parts of the bike to customize it, every time I've added something blue that originally was flat black or not there at all, I've liked the bike even better. And this, I think, will be one more little small details that'll change the look of the bike. Now, this is going to require making a pattern, getting the proper material, and then getting the part put in place. It should be relatively easy, but there's always a little pitfall or a twist or something. But then having that little triangle in there blue, it'll accent all the other pieces. And I think anytime I've added something blue to the bike, of course, I've liked it more than when it was flat black. Now, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but I wanted to get some trim similar to this on the fender. Not sure exactly how. I've been kind of putting that off for one of the last things. Yesterday we did the side scoops. This worked out great, by the way. That was one of the nicer, I think, one of the little things, and every little thing. Another thing that's going to be, I guess, in the next week or so, I want to replace the screening in the back and the scoop in the back. And when I think back about this bike, it had so much flat black, but when I bought the bike, I knew it was going to be, it's just a palette for customization. And I could picture in my mind a lot of things I could do to it. And actually, most of them came to fruition. The hardest one was the windshield. Making up all the carbon fiber bracketing so it laid down properly. 16 shop days to do the two wheels. And a lot of Photoshop days on the phone with John Pothier. And it all came to fruition. There's just a few details left to go. Now, all of these bikes and all of these mods, they start with a vision in your mind. I do some sketching. John does some Photoshop. We've had other people help us. Thomas Luciano was helpful with his laser cutter to make some of the stenciling for this bike. Every step of the way, though, I've had a picture in my mind of what I wanted this bike to look like, and little by little, it's come to fruition. And some people just prefer a stock bike. Hey, we could still be friends. Some people like a rusty bike. I like a clean bike. There's just no rhyme or reason in any of it. The bottom line is, though, no matter what kind of bike you like, or what your favorite one is, or the brand, or the way you ride it, or if you customize it or leave it stock, we can all be friends. Now, in the world of model planes, when I was the newsletter editor many, many years ago, I think in the 80s, I had a saying among the little constituencies, the little groups of people that like this type of plane or that type of plane, and I made this a famous saying of my own. There's room for everybody. And in the world of motorcycling, there really is. And again, that's an obvious little part that once I make it and make it blue, I just have a feeling when I go down to the computer, I'm going to say, every time I add something blue to this bike, I just keep and I have that other fender, which I was going to do something tricky with the other fender. I'm going to leave that for one of the last projects. But this bike, to see it the day I bought it and to see it now, totally different machine. And it's really filled the gap that I had of wanting to see all these little detail changes. And I remember on the day I picked it up, I was already starting to think, what color am I going to paint it? How am I going to do this? What am I going to do here? That, to me, just having a stock bike is, it's nice, but this is the part of motorcycling I enjoy, is the little custom touches. And none of these touches, by the way, cost a fortune or are really hard to do. They're just a lot of time and energy, to be honest. Now, just like almost every project we do, the projects all seem to start with a Cheerios box. and this one is no different. And coming up with a pattern, the step one of every job is to make a pattern. Now, I've seen guys that take the back foot pegs off, and since I never ride passengers, I thought about doing that. But there's something about this area of the bike that all of a sudden looks wrong. It looks naked without the back foot pegs. So I decided not to get too cute here, and let me just make up what amounts to be a rough pattern of the part that you would see blue. And this has a curve in it, so we're going to have to take that into account when we make the part. Okay, so that's got to go further up this way, and this is kind of the outside, and it's going to end here. But it is going to ultimately have a curve, so I'm lucky I have some really thin carbon fiber. This stuff, I should have scraps this size that I can use for this project. And once I get a pattern that I'm happy with, and it's pretty simple, this is going to need a little bit of a bend. There's a little bit of a bend in it, but the carbon fiber we can heat it and bend it, or just bend it without, it'll just stay that way. It's thin enough. And having that piece filled in, I think that's going to be a nice little touch. Of course, everything we do, everything is subjective, and I need to go check the other side and make sure it's symmetrical on the other side. And it looks for all purposes like it is pretty symmetrical. So once that piece is in there, and of course I just put tape on that so I could get a little vision of what it would look like on the other side, I think that's going to be one more little detail thing that's going to change the look of the bike. So now that we have a real good pattern, and it's pretty accurate, it doesn't have to be. I can leave it a little oversized because I'll trim it when I'm downstairs. And I know it's going to have a very slight bend in it, and that's not a big deal to do. But I think that's really going to work great. And it's symmetrical, so that's good. I can make sure I make two, because if I do two, when I flip the other one over, like everything, don't make two left-hand parts. Yeah, that's going to be a nice, I think it's going to be one more little thing of blue that I think is just going to make the bike just that much nicer. Every one of these little detail changes, I just think it just really, I don't know how to explain it. It changes the bike in a way that it's so much nicer. You wish Yamaha would have done this and just charge you a couple dollars extra for the bike, because none of these things would have cost Yamaha a lot of money to add to the bike. I know they make a special edition version and a touring version and everything, but I like this version right here the best. So this is a relatively small piece, and I'm trying not to use up a piece of carbon fiber that would be any bigger than what we could use for something else. I've got plenty of scraps, and it's just a question of looking around and finding one that's appropriate. And I want it to be, we have 3 different sizes. I want it to be able to bend. And by the way, anytime you want to make a bend in carbon fiber, just heat it, hold it in that position, let it cool. You can do it with a hair dryer. Maybe I'll do a demo with that later, with a scrap piece. But anyway, right now, this is, let's get this out of here. Doesn't belong there. I need to find some scrap. And this is the thick stuff. And luckily, I think we have plenty. Oh, here's some down here. Okay. Now this is the best piece of scrap that we have that both pieces fit on. And we'll be able to bend it a little bit if we have to. But what I'm looking for, because we're near the edge, I want to try to get this in a place that there's as few defects as possible, even though we're going to sand it. There'll be no problem to do that. But before I can do that, I'll lay this all out in blue tape, trace the part on it one way, trace it the other way, so I have one from each side, and then we'll be ready to sand it down. Now what's going to happen is I need to leave the edge on both sides unpainted so that the raw carbon with the scratches in it will bond with the epoxy to the aluminum, and I'll have to etch up the aluminum when I actually install it. So planning this all out ahead of time just makes it a little easier to get this, that we don't run into a problem. Again, when I trace out the parts, this is an important, a very important thing. Let's see if I can get this up against there. I'm trying not to waste material, because basically I can make as much as I want, but it just saves time if I don't have to make it. And I can use up the scraps. And I've put on the video many times how to make your own carbon fiber. Now here is always the trick. If you're not a modeler, and even if you're a modeler, the trick is flip it over and do the other side, because if you don't, the odds are real good, and unless you're really a genius or something, that you wind up at some point in your illustrious career making 2 left sides or 2 right sides. And so this is going to guarantee, because we only have one good side on this material, that this side we will have what I hope is a matched pair. And I'll be able to... But if I make 2, if I do this and do this, no good. Now I always like to use, it's just my own way of doing this, I like to use the green tape because the saw, it's really hard to see the blade. And, well, hard. It's almost impossible, in fact. And this makes it that it stacks the deck in your favor, that you're not going to cut it on the wrong side. And we'll be cutting all on the inside here, so. The green tape is very, very handy when you're doing this kind of work, or whenever you're using that Dremel saw. And the thing is, you can move it around. It's just a great way to do it. And that's an old trick from modeling. That should really make it easy to do the cutting, and I guess if you have better eyes than I have, you don't really need to do that. But that is a good trick from the world of modeling, and it seems to work well for me, and maybe other people that have vision issues with that Dremel saw. Now remember, when you're cutting carbon with that Dremel saw, it's rough on blades, so I try to use, I try not to force the part through, just let the blade do the work. It takes a little extra time, but if you force it through, those blades just seem to disintegrate. And of course, cutting this is just a matter of a little patience. I've sped it up just so you could not be bored to tears here, but it just takes time, and I don't have good eyes, so looking at that green tape is a lot easier than anything else. So at this point, I want to make sure I have a left side and a right side, and I want to make sure, I'm going to go out to the garage, make sure I have at least 1/8 of an inch of bond surface on each side that I can mask off so that paint doesn't get there, because otherwise the bond is no stronger than the paint. I want to go right to the carbon fiber with the epoxy. Not sure if I'm going to be able to show this, but this is why we do a test fit. It's hitting this bolt right here where the bolt goes through to hold that master cylinder, so we got to put a little relief in there, a little angle. We'll go down. That's why you have to always do a dry fit, no matter what you do. And then I want to mark this where I'm going to be able to have paint and where I'm going to be able to have raw carbon, so I can get a good grip on that when I install it. Now after 3 trips down to the grindstone, I think we finally got it. Let's see. And I traced out where it looks like I'm just going to have enough material there. Yeah, I guess I will. So both pieces are going to need that relief. So I use this one for a pattern. Now I can just go down and cut that into the other piece. And we need a very slight bend up at the top, so I want to show how you bend carbon fiber. So these are our 2 pieces. We know we have about a little less than 1/8 of an inch of material on each side that we can leave raw carbon. But to put a little curve in them, because these are basically straight, and the part right at the very end has a very slight curve. I want to put that curve in the carbon fiber so I don't have to put any stress on the glue joint. So what I want to do is, just using a heat gun, just get the part. I don't want to melt it. This is kind of a hit or miss thing. And now the thing is, just let it cool. When it's got that little bend in it, we'll just let it cool, see if it needs more. Halfway through we can do a little more. You can go back and forth as many times as you have to. Sooner or later, when the part cools, it'll retain that shape. You can actually feel it release. And this is how, in the world of model airplanes, we used to change the pitch of carbon fiber propellers, especially the ones I manufactured. Now we need a little more bend in these parts. Oh, this is what we dry fit for. Back and forth, may take 4 or 5 times. All part of the game. Now remember, you can do this back and forth as many times as you like. And that material stays soft until it goes back to room temperature. The whole trick is just let it cool. You got to be patient. Just let it cool. Or if you're trying to rush it, you can spray a little water on it. But basically it's going to cool, and when it comes out, it's going to be soft. You can actually, as soon as you can touch it, you can bend it with your hands, because inside it's still, you can see just how much of a curve we've put in those pieces. And it'll stay that way. If you were to reheat it, sometime it goes right back. So it's always a good idea. Now we got to do the final dry fit. Once we're happy, we'll be able to sand the parts. Okay, it looks like we've got just about the right amount of curve in these pieces now. And the next step on them is going to be sanded. Now, I want to be able to get as much of that resin off of there so that I get a good bite. I want a real good tooth onto that resin for the primer. So as I'm waiting to sand, I got and did some email, and here's some beautiful pictures from Stephen Walker, Brisbane, Australia. Look in the back. If you look up here, you see some kangaroos. Now, Stephen, I have to be honest with you what happened. My grandson, Miles, had to do a big report in school, a big project, and he chose Australia because his puppy is an Australian Labradoodle. And he dug in, and for about a whole week, all we were talking about was rhubards on the cars and all the things of Australia. Now, let's just look under the seat, and he's got the scoops coming out under the back of the seat. And I'm going to be making, I guess, in the next week or so, the screening there silver. I see more kangaroos there. Now, that's amazing. Amazing how many things we have in common here. Probably something one of his friends is studying about America. And he said he got a little bit too aggressive sanding, sanded through, but picked up from the videos so some of the techniques we use to repair things. We sand through all the time, Stephen. You're not alone. Anyway, good luck down in Australia, and we're going to get back to working on our parts here. And by the way, anybody sends pictures, it's easier if you send them as an attachment instead of making them part of the email. I can download them now and get a better copy on the video, but I do appreciate it, Stephen. I appreciate and thank you everybody for shares their passion of motorcycles. Okay, so these are our little carbon fiber parts. Now, you can see when we use the heat gun and put a bend in them, and I've showed that bend, and I've dry fit them, they're pretty close. But what happens? It ripples the skin of the part. Not a big deal. We're going to sand it and then put some thin CA on that to reseal it. It'll be no big deal at all to do that. Now, a lot of people don't know or not familiar with CA. CA will make a skin, a new skin. You could actually even do it with epoxy if you wanted to, but the CA goes quicker. But the first thing is to sand every edge. We know these fit. Get rid of all the little imperfections and get this in a rough, so it's got a tooth on it before we do anything. And by the way, I went back and forth with Stephen Walker in Australia. He's trying to send me these pictures in attachments. If you want to send pictures, and I'll put them on a video, send them to me in an attachment. That it's a lot easier than me taking pictures of the TV screen. A lot nicer too. But I love the kangaroos, and my grandson did do, again, that's not kidding. He did do that big thing about Australia. Anyway, we're going to start working on these, have another cup of coffee, and try to get these painted up today. So these are our little pieces, and I got, this is some 220. I'm going to do it dry so I can see the scratches. And this will only take a few minutes, and in the end, I'll use a sanding block to flatten it out. And I want to get the maximum tooth on this to really get a tooth, because part of it is going to be painted, but along the edge, we're going to be putting epoxy. And I want the epoxy not to be attached to paint, but to this tooth carbon fiber. And by the way, this is the West System clear resin. When we made this carbon fiber, this resin sands. You can see how it sands even dry, like butter. It's beautiful stuff. And I use the clear, the 207, just because it leaves a nicer, it doesn't turn yellow in time like some of the resins, even some of the West resins. If you leave them in time, they start to turn brown and orange and everything. Not the 207, but it's a little pricier. Okay, so we've got this. And I just wanted to show up close how that's sanded out. Now the last thing is with a sanding block, because we're going to have to do this a few times with the CA. And I'll show that up close and personal. I know a lot of people are not familiar with using CA. It's a modeling product, cyanoacrylate. And it's, well, it's not like using Bondo. Let's be realistic about it. So now another thing you can learn from this video, you could pick up, I guess. We don't need to do the back at all. The back's not going to get painted. There's always, I'll try to show this up close. I'm not sure if I can. There's always, let me show this, little air pockets, imperfections. And what the CA does also, it fills those in. So what will happen if I prime this, I'll have little fish eyes there typically. But a coat, if you have a small part, a thin coat of CA minimizes the chance you're going to have any fish eyes. Now if you look real close, one part, because we're using up scraps here. And by the way, when you make carbon fiber, if you want to minimize this, and I didn't do it with this because I knew I'd be sanding and painting everything. If this were going to be a clear coat and you want to absolutely minimize that, you put the epoxy on the glass first and run a hairdryer over it, and it'll bring all the little bubbles up to the surface. But when you're going to paint something, it's almost insignificant, especially if you're going to put CA on it. Now, to coat this all with CA, I'm going to show the method I use, and I've used it for many, many years. And the CA that I use always comes from Brodeck because it's the freshest, but you typically can buy it in any hobby shop. Okay, so to do this, a couple of things. You want to have old rubber gloves because inevitably it gets on there. There's not much you can do about it, but here's a little trick that may work for somebody. I don't know. You've got to be able to hold the part. Probably when you're using gloves, everything sticks to the glove. But if you make yourself, maybe I'm not even showing this correctly, and it doesn't matter how fancy it is, some little way to hold it. If you hold it here, you're going to get CA on your fingers for sure. And you'd like to get it to run, I'll show this way. Now I left the dust on. This is important, so let's just redo it. Leave the dust on. If you're doing wood, carbon fiber, leave the dust. The dust kicks off, it acts as the kicker for the material. And watch how this works. You want to get just enough that it puts a coating on. You don't want to just give it a bath. Now this is capillary material at a molecular level. This is going into every sanding scratch there is. Let it sit for a second. Try not to let it drip off. And when you wipe it with a paper towel, the dust in the paper towel will kick it off. And it'll be kind of sloppy, but it doesn't matter. Of course, we're going to sand it. Now you just wait for that to kick a minute or so, and we'll sand it. So now the objective is, and you can see, let me show it up close if I can. It of course, it's rough. We want to sand it back down, because now we're not sanding the carbon fiber, we're sanding the CA. Soon as it's smooth, we're done. And sometimes if you sand through, you can just put another coat on. It won't matter. The CA makes a great bond as long as you scratch it. Get it plenty scratched, and now you've ensured that that primer is going to get a good bite to it. You're not going to wind up somewhere down the road, and this really is good for small parts. And like this is a good example of those little covers we made for the side, or the part that I'm going to make at some real near future time is a part for the chain guard attachment. And we're going to show that, of course. But just getting it smooth, doesn't matter what grit you use, 400, 320. In this case, I just happen to have a piece of scrap 220. It won't really matter. Okay, these are etched up on both sides. In the end, I'll paint the back of it flat black. But that's ready. I'm going to wipe that down with the degreasing agent and get it back masked and get it primed. So Sikkens M600 is the best degreasing agent I know for this. I want to degrease it before I backmask it, get all the dust off it, and I think we're set up here for some reasonably good success with the paint without having to deal with fish eyes or too many imperfections anyway. And the backmasking the part, pretty straightforward, and trimming it off, but leaving the edges that I'll have raw carbon along the edges where I'm going to make a glue joint. So as always, I have to have a way of holding it apart, and I'll get some vice grips or something because I don't want to get paint all over my hands when I'm doing this. Now, these parts are prepped, but if we were to just leave these and say we were going to put clear on them, yeah, it might be a problem because we do have those little pinholes in there. But because we're painting them, even if the primer picks up those little pinholes, we'll just put another coat of primer on. But getting the parts prepped before painting and getting a little handle on them, the most important thing. I know it's always people when they're new to painting, and of course we're trying to help those people the most, to be able to hold the part without having to grab it and without getting yourself all full of paint. That's always an important thing, and that worked out pretty well. Those parts are sanded, prepped, CA'd, ready for primer. Now, I always try to pass on tips. You see this little thing on the cap that says good? I bought, I think, a dozen cans. It was a case anyway. Bought it off the internet, and at least half of the cans, halfway through spraying, they start spitting all over the place, and I replaced the tip on some of them. Didn't really do it. Some of them still spit. So I don't know, but anyway, we're going to use up this primer, and if it spits on a small part like this, it won't even matter. Now remember, the primer is glue. I'm not using it to fill in anything. Thin coat. If you do need a second coat, let it dry thoroughly before you put the second coat on. Now we try to get a thin coat of primer on that. It doesn't look like there's any defects or anything in there, so that's going to dry 15-20 minutes, and we'll mix up some blue. Be ready to paint the blue. And the blue is Chromax. This is really expensive paint, so I try not to waste any of it. And the Chromax is a really high quality paint. Dennis at Gavin's mixed it. It's a really nice match. I wanted to put 2 coats on just to be sure. I like to put, in this weather, and it's warming up as the day goes on, I wanted to get 2 thin coats, not 1 big thick coat. And with the weather warming up here, I was really confident that we would get this done today. Now we're going to use some of the clear donated by Turbo Steve. Got this at Gavin's, and it's the 3 or 4 different kind of clears we've used all seem pretty similar, but this is a good one. And one of the questions we always answer is, how long before you put the clear on? Well, in this case, it's about a half an hour. Or I always say it's a good coffee break. Make sure you have a good coffee break. And it's warmed up out there to the point where this is really the warmest day of the year so far. I'll bet it's going to go in the high 50s today. You may even get a ride this afternoon. You never know. I never try to plan these things. See, I always leave, I just wanted to put this tip on video, I always leave all the moving parts of the gun and the lid so I don't get any of that contamination down in there, especially when I'm going to do 4-to-1 paint like I'm doing today. Now, if you know you're not going to use hardener for a while, and we use it almost every other day here, but if you know you're going to put it away for a month or for a season, put it in the refrigerator. Not the freezer, just the hardener. It'll prolong the life. Now I'm mixing, and this is what I do. I put a little thing with a Sharpie marker in there, because obviously paint is expensive, and the reality is I don't like to waste anything, but especially 4-to-1 paint. Anyway, this product is really good, but you know what? I haven't found a clear that I would honestly say, well, I don't use that clear. All of the clears that we've had so far, every one of them has been really good, so I'm kind of happy about that. But Gavin's is one of the good ones, that's for sure. And they're all very similar in price. One isn't, you know, not that I've found anyway. But then you have the ones I call the high-end clears that are really expensive. I think and I think what you buy is more UV protection or something. But basically, these inexpensive ones, I have never had a problem buffing this clear out. Now another good little tip, and it's a really good tip, is don't, and I've heard this both ways, but I always like to pass on what I think is the best information. Never start the 4-to-1 or any epoxy with a wood stick. Some epoxies and some paints, the wood absorbs the part of the catalyst, some of the chemicals in the catalyst. I've heard that from people that run body shops. And then I've heard other people say, just start with a wooden spoon or something. So I don't know, I'm passing on what I know is worked for me, and that's really the only information that I think is valid. I start with something metal or something carbon fiber, but not wood. Now another good little tip, if you're using one of these inexpensive Harbor Freight guns, they do tend after time to drip and drool. And if they drip on your part, it can be a pain. A small part like this, not really important, but that is another really useful tip. And that's what our channel's for. And that's why we try to post a video up every day, because basically in my world, I learn something new every day from people. And a lot of times, I learn it and I forget to pass it on. A week later I say, oh, I never passed that on. And if you already noticed, it didn't cost you a penny. So it's warming up out there and the clear is going on. I wanted to fine tune the gun, get it just the way I want. I want it to spray relatively dry like an airbrush. I want to put a lot of thin coats, not one big giant glocky coat on this. And because the weather is warming up now, we're going to change our spray technique a little bit. For anything else, we're still going to paint, but we're pretty much done. We're at the end of the season here of doing this stuff, and it looks like that paint just laid down beautifully. We give it 15-20 minutes between coats and get the second coat on, and it'll be time to put it in the garage to dry. Once I'm happy that the paint is laying down nice. And a day like today, we'll take advantage of the warm weather anytime we get it. So this day really played out well. We got our parts. They're going to dry overnight now. We'll assemble this and put it back on the bike tomorrow. It'll be just a question of taking off the foot pegs, and on this side we have to take the master cylinder off, epoxying these parts on. But the day warmed up. It was unexpected to warm up. We are in the high 50s here. This is unbelievable. And I still have time to go for a short ride. But this is going to be the end of this for today. I don't want to rush this. I want to let it dry overnight, buff it out. I want to do it right. And in the end, I'll be glad I waited. So the way the day played out, and with the way the weather played out, I got to take some extra pictures for my picture album. And I probably have, this is the third album I have with over 1,000 pictures in each album. So we got a lot of pictures. And I try to save them all because by looking at these Photoshop pictures, and here's the screening that we did just yesterday, I think. And with the silver wheels, all the things that John Pothier was able to do ahead of time, and all the parts I've polished on this bike and how the wheels came out. I just like having the pictures to look at and evaluate. Now, one of the next things will be those silver, the screening in the back, the scooping. I love how some of these, the badging came out on this, and that was just a long time coming. It just took a long time to figure that out. But when we got it, I think it really did add something to the bike that wasn't there before. The way the screening played out from the front view, and the MT09, the logo with the little triangle at the end, carbon fiber license plate mount. Every one of these things I love to look at. I love to check them out and make sure that they're exactly what I wanted. And if you take enough pictures and you look at them on your computer long enough, you'll figure something out that you want to make better, make different, or whatever. That's the kind of thing this is. It's just a labor of love to do these pictures, but in the end, you really have a valuable commodity. And a lot of times when I look at the pictures on my computer under different lighting, sunlight, the other day we took pictures when it was raining, you see something that wasn't really obvious right in the beginning, and you look at it and you think, maybe I could change that, make it better. Now, a good example of that is the radar detector. And as many times as I thought about doing it, when I finally found that box in Lowe's, that $12 box, the rest of the pieces all came together. And by having that, it's changed a little bit of how I can lean my weight forward on the bike to, it's just me anyway, my ergonomics, my riding style, whatever. But looking at all of these things, I just think every single one of them makes a change in the bike. Even these small little details like the parts we worked on today. Small details, but you add them up, and at the end, if I were to take this bike and put it in my backyard, and then take the bike I bought the day I bought it and put it in the backyard with that big ugly taillight that it had on, and a gray fender and gray side covers, blue wheels, but I knew all along, and I was very sneaky about it. I had a whole year riding a bike to think about what I wanted to do before I started making commitments on things like the chain guard and like the silver wheels. And Karen has been instrumental in helping me. John Pothier has been able to help me. And the whole thing is I've done it one little step at a time, and I've got to see it on the computer one step at a time, and then I plan the next move. Almost like a chess game. And finally today is the first day I really feel like spring is here. And I did get a little short ride and didn't even bother zipping up the jacket. It was pleasant. And for the first time, it's the first ride of the year where it's been really pleasant riding. And I'll take every one I can get. Because my whole objective with owning these motorcycles is I like to ride a different bike from time to time. I like the different feels of the different era bikes. And I do like every one of them, and that's really a problem. And maybe I need more. Karen doesn't agree, but I always think there's room for one more in the garage there. The only problem is she does not agree. And guess who gets the final vote? And thanks for watching.